Welcome to the Rewild Gear Podcast. Modern life, society, and responsibilities have domesticated us. But now it's time to rediscover your adventurous side. Whether that's camping, hiking, hunting, fishing, or just spending time in the great outdoors, this is the podcast for you. Join us as we get back to the wilderness and rewild. Welcome to the Rewild Gear Podcast. I'm here today with Brad Brooks, who is the owner and general manager of Argali Outdoors, a backcountry hunting gear and equipment company. Brad is an adventure, conservation, and family man that hails from Boise, Idaho. He's also an all-around great dude and a serious hunter who I've followed kind of online and some of his exploits for years and have purchased many of the products that Argali has, and they are amazing quality. So I'm really excited to have Brad on the show today and kind of hear some of his stories and introduce him to everybody. Brad, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Seth.
Totally. Brad, I'd love to dig into your origin story and kind of hear how you got to where you are today, because you've done a lot of different things, starting a successful outdoor brand, been really active in conservation space, and you're also an accomplished hunter. So let's just kind of start at the beginning.
Sure. Yeah. It's kind of hard to know where to start, man, because I don't, my life plan has never been to own a gear company or to be in the hunting industry. It wasn't something that was planned out. It feels like a consequence of sort of cascading events. But it's a happy coincidence.
Usually how things work out.
Yeah. Yeah. There was never any intent, even 5 years ago to be where I'm at today. But I'm thrilled with where I'm at, and I'm very happy with how things have turned out. So let me just start with I don't know how far back you want me to go, but I can give you the story of the hunting company and how we got here, if that's where you want to start.
Yeah. What were you doing before starting Argali?
Yeah. So my background is in my training, I should say, is in environmental economics. And I've spent years working for public lands conservation. And that was very intentional. When I left college, I honestly didn't know what I wanted to do. I've always been drawn to the allure of big, wild places. Wilderness has played a key role in my life, in what I do and what I value. And after I left college, I got a job with the Forest Service working up in the mountains of central Idaho, Sawtooth National Forest, Sawtooth Wilderness. And for anybody that's ever been to the Sawtooth, it is perhaps one of the most iconic, gorgeous mountain ranges you'll ever see. I mean, it's just beautiful, stunning. And so I spent a summer working up there, and after spending a summer sort of living in the mountains, working for the Forest Service, thought, this is really important to me. I love this stuff. If I can find a way to spend my daily life working on something that I care about, then that would be a win. And so tried to figure out how to do that, and was able to get a job working in public lands conservation and wilderness, wild and scenic rivers. I worked for a company called the Wilderness Society. And again, it was one of those situations where it is very difficult to get a job in that field, because there are just a lot of people that want to do it and not a lot of job opportunities. But somehow I kind of stumbled into it and was fortunate enough to spend 15 years or so doing that kind of work. And I loved it. I still love it. I'm passionate about it. Being able to work on protecting places that other, future generations and other people will be able to use and enjoy in the future is incredibly rewarding. And it gave me, I think, a sense of purpose. So anyways, that was kind of my story prior to Argali, and kind of how I spent my personal time.
Yeah. So it sounds like you have had a passion for nature and the outdoors for years. I'd like to dive into that a little bit more. And can you tell me, where did that love come from? Because it sounds like it was ingrained from a very early age.
Yeah, I usually, I've been asked that before, and I think my answer is I don't really know. I don't feel like I had a choice though. It was clear from an early age that was who I was and something that was really important to me. My dad is the one who got me into hunting, and we spent sort of stereotypical childhood spent hunting and fishing, I imagine. But he's from the Midwest. My dad's not a Western guy, so he's from Wisconsin. And so growing up, our hunting experiences were not on horses packing into country. It was more your Midwest whitetail type experience. We would have car camp and day hunt. We would hunt, we would hunt elk like you would hunt whitetails. So we do elk drives or things that fairly uncommon tactics now, but we spent a lot of time outside hunting and fishing. We would do, as a kid, we didn't necessarily have a lot of money, but we would travel all over the place and camp and fish. And that was, yeah. Anyway, so I spent a lot of time outside, and there was something, I can't remember, how old I was, but it was probably in high school era where I found backpacking. Again, it's not something my parents sort of taught me how to do, but I really wanted to do it. And so figured out, I worked in high school, scrounged up enough money to buy a North Face tent at a REI garage sale because I couldn't afford anything else. That tent was a 3-person tent and weighed almost 7 pounds. And I thought it was a fantastic backpacking tent. Now a 7-pound tent is just kind of outrageous for backpacking, but, and I think I got like a graduation gift with like a backpacking stove. So I scrounged up the gear, borrowed what I could, and mostly just spent those early backpacking trips. It was kind of, a suffer fest. It was never that comfortable, but I don't remember ever not loving it. So, I'm not sure where it comes from, Seth. I think there is something about, people experience in big wild country that is sort of like a gateway drug. Rarely have I seen, somebody who goes out into, big, beautiful country and doesn't feel some sort of connection or pull to it. And I don't care who you are or where you're from. I think it's something that is part of the human psyche, and we all are drawn to it in some way, or at least find some appeal in it. Doesn't mean that everybody wants to go backpacking, but I think that there is something inherent in just people that draws them to it. And for me, it was clear, from a high school age on that those places were really important to me. And I'd say, even back then, I recognized that the value of wild country, there was something that was centering about it. Even today, we had a hard time scheduling this podcast because of me. My life is so scheduled out, and I work all the time. It feels like the only place that I can go to escape and sort of recenter my brain and my mind is in wild country. So it, started back then. I certainly, growing up didn't have the same, real world adult responsibilities that I have today, but there's little doubt that has been a through line for my entire life about why wild country is important.
That makes sense. Yeah. And I found that is the same with a lot of other people and a lot of other guests that I've interviewed. There's always just there's this draw to nature, to the outdoors, to the wild. And, trying to define that, what it is can be really challenging. Just because it's something innate, because it goes back to our roots when, we lived under the stars and in the woods, and not just in the domesticated life in which we live.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd agree.
Yeah. Let's get into how you got started creating Argali. So you were doing some hunts and working in the conservation space. So how do you jump from that into becoming an entrepreneur and a business owner? Because it sounds like that wasn't how you grew up necessarily.
No, it wasn't. Business has always been an interest of mine. Even though my undergraduate degree was in environmental economics, I ended up getting an MBA along the way just because I was interested in business. I don't really advertise that because it sounds like there's something about, telling people that you have an MBA that comes across the wrong way. And I have dabbled in different businesses over the years, so it's not like this was my first attempt at running a business.
Let's hear about some of the early ones.
Well, if you want to go way back,
yeah,
I was a little bit of a hustler back in high school. I had a lawn mowing business. We had a snow shoveling business. So, there were some of the early ones, which actually made a surprising amount of money for a high school kid. And then, there were I had at one point in time, a rock climbing website that I had dabbled around with playing, which was I don't really know what the business strategy was there, to be honest with you, in hindsight, but there was something about creating a site that we could, sell ad space on.
Sure.
And those were kind of I'd say those. And then there were, some other, Argali was originally, well, let me go way back. So in 2010, Argali was originally envisioned as a clothing company. So when I was getting my MBA, this is before I knew about First Light, before Kuyu was on the scene, before, Sitka was barely around. And I had what I thought was original idea of taking some of the technical designs from clothes that I was wearing at the time, which was largely Patagonia, some North Face pieces, and trying to make a merino wool base layer company with some outer layer pieces. In hindsight, that's exactly what some other companies were doing at the exact same time. I live in Idaho. I literally didn't know that First Light existed, and they were in Ketchum at the time. They were a small company that was really not on anybody's that I knew of's radar. I didn't know anybody that was wearing First Light at the time. The challenge, building a clothing business is difficult, and at the time, I really had no experience. I was young, still young, right? So, but I was really young at the time, and it was hard to sort of piece together, figuring out how to build a clothing business. But I actually made quite a bit of progress. We had some designs. We had a supplier in New Zealand for the merino.
Mm-hmm.
My biggest constraint at the time was capital. I just didn't know how to get the capital I needed to start that business. And it was a capital intensive endeavor when you're starting a clothing company.
Yeah.
And ultimately it was
all the different sizing and the variations and all of that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's hard to start a clothing brand, I would say, unless you have a few $100,000
mm-hmm.
in capital to get started. And, not having that laying around and not having access to that through, family and friends, my options were to mortgage my house. And at the time I got married in 2010, and I didn't feel at the time like it was a really good way for my wife and I to start our life together, of me mortgaging our house to the hilt and
Sure.
on this bet. Now, I don't know how to describe it, to say that like where I'm at now, I have a pretty good sense of what risks I want to take. At the time, it felt like more risk than I wanted to bite off.
Sure.
And, if there's one thing that, any business owner can understand, it's that, every day you're calculating risk and making risk assessments, whether that's financial or otherwise. And I don't think at that point in my life, I really understood what risks were worth taking and which ones weren't. It was too much risk for me at the time. So I shelved the idea. I still have my designs, I still have my camo pattern that I developed, which, I actually looked at about 6 months ago.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how I was sifting through some of my old files, and I was like, that's still a pretty good looking camo pattern. I think that would hold up today. But anyways, that was sort of the origination of Argali, the original idea for Argali. And then after, just to kind of like fast forward, I kind of shelved it and was like, I'm not sure this is going to work out. About 5 years later, my now business partner and I were, talking about hunting media and content, and how the content at the time, which again, I'm not sure if people really remember back. But it was largely, hunting content was largely a TV driven enterprise.
Yeah.
Sportsman channel, outdoor channel. That's where hunting content was largely being consumed. YouTube was around and there was good YouTube content, but it was not like it is today. It's exploded. And, so there was no business. Like, we just wanted to make a film that was sort of capturing what was important to us about hunting. And that was really, connection to place and connection to wild places. So we made a film, and that film, that was it. There was no business. It was, we want to make a piece of content and tell a story. And that's all there was. And we tried to sell, came up with a pitch and tried to sell it to some companies. Not sell the film, but sell the idea to see if it resonated, if sort of the basis for what we were trying to do had appeal. And in some ways, that was a calculated test to see if this idea for Argali was something that other people found interest in. And that's kind of how we got our start.
Gotcha. Well, that's fascinating. A couple things I want to touch on here. You said something really interesting about how there were all these other companies that were kind of starting around the same time and you were unaware of it. And I've noticed that in a lot of different industries. And even throughout history, we've seen that where people, scientists, inventors, they were working on almost the exact same thing in completely different areas of the world. But it's almost like there was this collective consciousness that it's tying everyone together, where they're all kind of working on very similar things. And I find that absolutely fascinating. Have you thought about that at all?
Yes. It also makes me think that it's made me realize that timing is everything in life and in business. Mm-hmm. And I don't know why there were so many. I shouldn't say so many of us, but there were probably 4 companies that I'm aware of that were kind of striving for the same thing at the same time. And some of them no longer exist, but the ones that have survived, First Light, Kuiu, and Sitka are probably the biggest 3 that come to my mind. I think the folks who started that company they all had the same sort of a similar idea right around the same time, sort of came to this realization. I imagine there were a lot of other people who had the same thought and the same idea. The difference is, as you and I well know, Seth, that when it comes to building a business, an idea is one thing, but having the understanding of how to take your idea and turn it into something tangible, whole other set of skills, right?
Yes.
So I don't even know that it was, just a few people. I imagine there were a lot of people who had the idea of taking technical clothing and bringing it to the hunting world. But it is interesting and noteworthy that it sort of seemed to be these periods of time, just like you mentioned, where it's like, why is it around 2010, all of a sudden there's 3 technical hunting clothing companies? Why not 3 years earlier or 3 years later? I don't know.
Or even spread out further, where it was like one started in 2008 and the other one started in 2012 and spread out more. I find that fascinating. I've seen that in a lot of different industries over the years and even historically too. So I don't know what it is, but it's really interesting. Mm-hmm. Brad, where did the name of the company come from? So I know what an Argali is. How did you decide on that?
Yeah, there isn't really a super interesting backstory there, Seth. It's just that I liked the symbolism of sheep. Argali was sort of short and sweet and to the point and unique enough. And there's something, sheep are an iconic species. Anybody who's aware, spent time in sheep country knows that, sheep country is rugged, wild, typically fairly desolate. I don't care if you're hunting sheep in North America, Canada, or Middle East. And so there's a symbolism. There's something about sheep in particular in the country they inhabit that was emblematic of what I cared about and what I valued. So that's really kind of how we got where the name came from.
Cool. So something else that you had mentioned, or talking about creating the films and when you were getting started. So I believe you're doing that with your brothers and maybe your father as well. Am I correct on that?
No, they've all been in our content. That first film I made with my older brother and I, and I try and hunt and bring my brothers into our content as much as possible, just because I like hunting with them. But yeah, that first film, my business partner Jason and I made it. My brother was one of the people in the film.
Got it. I see. Yeah, because with our company, with Rewild Gear, there's 4 brothers involved, and so I'm always fascinated by family businesses and and when people come together and work together, because there's already that bond, and you already know someone so well, and you can trust them, which is great. And our mutual friends and business partners, White River and I, is kind of the same thing. Family owned and all of that. I just hung out with all of them at Blade Show over the weekend, and just establish that relationship even further because we're working together. And I just love family type businesses like that, where it kind of ties together. And especially when it comes to hunting, you're sitting around the fire and drinking bourbon in the evening, or maybe coffee in the morning, and just telling stories about the hunt. So I'd kind of like to hear some of your stories there surrounding that, as spending time with family in the outdoors.
Yeah, I mean, I have two brothers. My older brother and I are close in age and grew up hunting together. My younger brother's 4.5 years younger than me, so I'm the middle brother. But yeah, family is important for a lot of reasons. I think it's hard to describe, but it's also something that we have leaned into the familial connection in our content, and I don't think you need to have 2 brothers or 4 brothers to be able to relate to the connection of family, whether that's in hunting or any other aspect of your life. So yeah, my older brother and I, we grew up hunting, I'd say more together than my younger brother and I did. It's been, one of the great things about getting a little bit older is, you sort of, for us anyway, we all kind of did our own thing in our early, I'd say late teenage years through our 20s. And now that we all are, married and have kids now, have kind of come back together. We all sort of live in the same area, and
that's helpful.
Now get to hunt together. Yeah, it is. It is helpful, and get to hunt together and hang out together as adults, which is great. I mean, there's nobody understands you like your family does.
Yeah, for better or worse,
good and bad. Yeah, exactly.
Totally.
So, anyways, yeah, it's and I try to hunt with my family, my brothers, as much as I can. It gets hard with responsibilities and other things to carve out time to hunt with family and friends. I think one of the things that, for me at least, that I'm trying to be more intentional about is finding time to hunt with friends I used to hunt with that I just, because of responsibilities I have, I just don't have time to hunt with them anymore. And I don't like that. So I'm trying to make time to, hunt with people that I grew up hunting with, that I miss spending time with.
Yeah, that makes sense. Something else when it comes to family is kind of that work-life balance. How do you balance all that, with family, with being married, with kids, spending time, on your company, on your business, the conservation efforts, and then spending time hunting and under the stars?
Oh, it's a daily struggle. Daily. It is one of the challenges I deal with this every day. I mean, I have 2 young girls and a fantastic partner, and they are the most important thing to me. For me though, I know that for me to be me, I have to go out and hunt and spend time in wild country, but it's also a little bit selfish, right? And when I'm gone, it's not easy on my wife. My girls are, not necessarily thrilled that I'm not around when I'm gone.
Sure.
And so it's a balancing act. When I'm home, I'm home. I try and be present, spend time with my kids as much as I can, take them out fishing. We take them out hiking. We take them out camping. So I do everything I can while I'm here to spend time with them and be with them. But I think if you were to ask people around me, they would probably tell you that I'm gone a lot and I work a lot. And so, and I don't, I don't know, man. This is one of those things that is it's a tough one for me anyways, because the worst thing you can do as a father and as a family man, a family person, I should say, is not be present for your family or feel like they're getting the short end of the stick in favor of some of these other, hunting or business or whatever else it is people have going in their lives. So, I think being brutally honest about it with my wife and we talk about it all the time. When I'm the fall, I'm gone. I am gone a lot traveling and hunting. This fall, I'm going to be gone for, a 6-week stint up in Alaska. My family's going to come up for, on the front third of that for about a week to hang out with me. But, there'll be about a month period where I'm not going to see my kids or my wife, which is a long time. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a long time. And, I don't know that I'll ever do this again in my life, but that'll be hard. To be honest with you, like that'll be as hard on me as it is on anybody else. Cause I actually like being around my family.
Yeah.
So anyways, I think it's just a balancing act of, doing what I feel like I need to in order to like live my life, and also, not being excuse my language, but not being a total asshole and being completely selfish.
Sure. And
trying to be present for your kids and making sure that they're feeling like they're, you're giving them the attention they need. So it is a balancing act though, man. And I don't know what the formula is, mm-hmm. and I'm constantly evaluating it.
I hear that. It sounds like your wife is incredibly supportive around that. How does she deal with that while you're gone, and how do you trade off there when you're home so that she can get some of that downtime too?
She is supportive. If she were here on here, I don't think she would say that she's like thrilled about any of the time being gone, but I think she understands me. And I think that that's kind of one of the keys to, our relationship is just finding somebody who we kind of understand each other. She has her own, hobbies, passions, interests. And, when I am home, support her as much as I can. So if she wants to go do something, great. We schedule, make sure that we have sort of scheduled, structured time where I think she gets to go do her thing and, away from the kids. He has some, what she's doing right now, actually. So yeah. And I think that, the other thing I try and do is say like, okay, if like this year we went to Hawaii, bring the kids and her up to Alaska, I get to see a lot of places and a lot of cool things just through hunting. Hunting has taken me to some incredible places. And, my wife isn't somebody she's not a hunter. She doesn't have any desire to suffer in the, out hunting kind of in the way that I seem to do from time to time, but she does like an equal country.
Are we?
What's that?
We're all something of a masochist, aren't we?
Yeah. So anyways, but I try and just make time to do family stuff and things that she wants to do. And I'm conscious of, making time for trips and vacations that are things that she wants to do that aren't just like places I want to go. So when it comes to non-hunting trips, I try and make sure that those are largely driven by what she wants to do, not what I want to do. So if that's going to Central America, if that's going to Hawaii, if that's going camping, that's perfect. That's great. So,
yeah. And I think the trade-off here, or part of it, is that by the things that you're doing, growing a business, building Argali, doing the films, all of those things, some of those marketing efforts, that gives you the ability to take those other trips. So it's like, it's a trade-off.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a trade-off. And, my wife now, she works for Argali now full time. So, I mean, there is some, and, that gives her, she runs, she runs all of her customer service. So anybody who has ever, writes in customer service, that's all Angie. She handles all of that. A lot of our logistics, dealer sales, all that kind of stuff. So as a result, she comes from a background in retail and also was a kindergarten teacher, but working for the company gives her some flexibility as well. So it allows us to have some like flexibility in our lives as well.
Yeah. I know that makes sense. That's great. And Brad, how many nights a year are you typically spending under the stars, just on average?
I haven't counted it up in a while. I probably spent You're making me wonder now. I probably spent at least 75 nights in the tent
Wow.
last year.
Okay. Wow. That's
Yeah.
great.
Yeah. It's a lot, but
So yeah,
it might be more than
yeah,
some years. Some years it's gone up, it's been higher than that. I can remember years where I've spent, like upwards of 100 nights out, but that was like pre-kids, I don't spend.
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, got it. So as a company, Argali is taking a very strong conservation stance. So I'd love to dig into that just a little bit as far as, why conservation is so important to you and what you see the biggest threats are today when it comes to protecting our wild spaces, our wild animals, and all of those topics surrounding conservation and environmentalism.
Yeah. It's not, for us, the conservation stuff is not a marketing ploy. I mean, that is, it's built into like why we started this. And so, why, like, so anyway, so I don't know I can't remember if your question was why is conservation so important and what the biggest issues are.
More what you see the biggest issues today, our biggest threats are, and how you guys are going about helping that.
Gotcha. So let me just start with the big, like how we engage in conservation. So we support, financially and with product donations to groups that I consider to be representing hunting and angling interests in conservation sort of across the country. So that's, National Wildlife Federation, Backcountry Hunters and Anglers, TRCP, other groups. We are intentional about the groups we support. I'm also intentional about the groups we don't support too. So we are, we don't just support the groups that, we think might give us a marketing advantage. I support the groups that I think align with our values. And there are a lot of great groups doing a lot of great work out there. So that's kind of how we do it. I'd say we also spend, as much as we can, we spend time if there's a need doing some work that might be stewardship work, doing like a restoration project, planting, shrubs, winter range, etc. So anyways, let me just circle back. Like biggest threats to our wild country today. Honestly, probably the biggest threat that I see from the hunting and angling community to wild country is lack of interest and understanding that there is a threat. I think that there is I would say a fallacy that people believe that things are always going to stay the way they are, and that there is just this sort of even keel state that like, well, if I've always gone to this place and I've always liked it, it's always going to be that way. And I think a lack of understanding that the places that if you ever go to a piece of wild country, whether that's wilderness, a national recreation area, a refuge, a wildlife refuge, whatever that is, that place is protected because there were a set of people who understood that in order to have that place be like it is, in perpetuity or into the future, it requires some action and some forward thinking in terms of like figuring out like how can we protect this place into the future and keep it the way it is. And that is not, anybody who's ever worked to protect a place knows that is not easy, and it is not uncontroversial. So I think, again, just like the biggest threat is like people being willing, like people understanding that it requires taking a stance, and it requires being able to support, protecting wild country. And it isn't just going to happen by just like not doing anything. So, and then in terms of like specific threats, they run the gamut. It's typical, sort of like, civilized society, intrusions into wild country. So if you think about, Seth, one way to think about it is, back when there was first like westward expansion in the US, right? So like, white people encroaching on what was land that was largely just inhabited by native tribes. It was, you could argue that it was sort of like one vast, wilderness area. There weren't roads in the way that we know them today. Native tribes certainly had roads that they used in some places to, go hunt buffalo or go from go between different territories. But it was largely what we would call, small W wilderness. And over time, we have just slowly chipped away at the amount of places that are difficult to get to. And the amount of wild country is just shrinking, right, every day because of roads, civilizations increasing in size. Our impact as a species on the planet and our footprint is growing, not shrinking over time, right? So 30 years from now, 50 years from now, we're not going to have a smaller imprint than we do today. We're going to have a larger imprint. That is what it is, society, we're growing as a species. I think what I'm hoping people understand is that there's a trade-off for that. And for me, the loss of the ability to get lost in wild country is a tragedy. There should be places where we can all go and get lost. And, I wonder what it's going to be like 50, 75, 100 years from now. Like what are the opportunities that are going to be out there for people to just wander out in the woods and just get lost? Now, for most people, that's terrifying. But for me, it's like, I would love the idea of not having that ability is also sort of terrifying to me.
I think that's great info, just as far as, protecting those wild spaces, because we definitely those are being encroached on every day. And one thing that I'm interested in is rewilding some of those places that used to be wild and that have become more domesticated, but we can turn some of those back into those places. For example, in Kentucky, where I'm from, they reintroduced elk in kind of the Appalachian and coal country. And some of those old coal mines, those are being reverted back to the more wild countryside that it used to be. And so that's where some of the elk are inhabiting now. So, and I'm pretty fascinated by that and think there's opportunity there throughout the country in places like that.
Yeah.
Have you looked into that at all?
I haven't, but I think that's super intriguing. And I think that's a great idea, Seth, because, there are still a lot of places that we can, have a lot of wild character that we can protect. But the reality is that there's also a lot of opportunity in what you're talking about, which is like rewilding country. I'd say where I live in the West, there's opportunity for that. I think, we're still fortunate to have a lot of wild country. And I'd say my personal interest and passion is in trying to keep as much of that as we can, so we don't lose it. But I think there's, like you're saying, there's, there is a lot of opportunity for rewilding country. And, certainly I've seen some of that through, there are, wildlife refuges I've seen being created around some urban areas where there's like, former ranches or farmland have been purchased and turned into, marshlands, or just other sort of wildlife habitat that people can go use. So it's a cool idea.
Yeah, totally. Brad, a couple questions here. What is your most memorable outdoor experience and what did you learn from it? And what adventurous experience would you never want to repeat and why? Typically, I ask those as two separate questions, but I found that often it can be the same thing. It's the one that might have been the craziest is the one that we learn the most from. So maybe those are separate. Maybe.
Yeah, those are good questions. I'd say the one that I probably wouldn't repeat again is these are both rock climbing experiences. So in addition to hunting, rock climbing is another passion of mine. There's a lot of risk inherent in climbing. And there was a particular climb I did right after I had our first kid. And I'm never somebody who's thought about dialing back my risk because of kids, but I had a very distinct moment where I was in a situation where lead climbing in the middle of nowhere, 1,000 feet off the ground. And had I fallen, I don't know what would have happened, but it was a high risk scenario, either where it was like death or, your legs are going to be broken, you're going to be pretty messed up. So I don't really want to repeat that. And I remember having a distinct moment while I was leading, and it's pretty hard climbing what we were doing. And I just remember having a moment, which I had never had before, which was like, you're a dad now, it's not okay for you not to come home. So, I think about that. And I also think about, taking, smarter risks when I'm outside. That said, I am spending a whole lot of time in Grizz country up in Alaska this year, and I don't view that as in the same plane. So that's one I wouldn't want to repeat. I'd say my most memorable experience, though, that I have never forgotten is when I was 15, hunting elk, and the first time I can remember going off by myself, like without my dad for an extended period of time, like hunting in the mountains, and got lost, like utterly lost, and I was unprepared. Got dark, and somehow I found my way back to camp in the dark. I was terrified, though. Yeah.
And what did you learn from that?
Pay attention to where you're going, and always bring a headlamp.
That's a good segue into my next question of what gear do you consider essential that you always bring with you whenever you're on a wilderness adventure?
A knife for sure, which is fitting. Good pair of boots is always a must. Yeah, there's a bunch of them. There's a handful of things that are really important. I'd say proper clothing, proper pair of boots, and a knife will get you through a lot.
Yeah. Well, we're big fans of knives over here, as you are too.
Yeah.
I'd like to ask just a couple quick questions about some of the equipment that Argali makes and how you decided to get into the actual products that you are. So obviously you're known for your game bags and getting to be very well known for your knives as well, which I love also. Can you kind of explain that as far as how you decided which products and kind of the sequence there?
Yeah. I'm pretty meticulous about my gear, and I'm always sort of picking apart the things I'm using. And when it came to game bags, were the first product we made, and the game bags, I was out, most of the product ideas I have come, while I'm using product. And I can just remember distinctly having an experience where it occurred to me that the game bags I was using at the time, and I've used a bunch of them, weren't really made in a way that I wanted. And so I made my own with technical features and some materials that I thought were more well suited to the style of hunting that I was doing. And specifically, we make a set of reusable game bags that are made to be durable, reusable, lightweight, and also have some materials built in that are reusable. So, for example, I never understood why the cinch cord on game bags weren't made out of paracord that you could actually use in the field for field repairs and gear repairs. And so we used 275-pound reflective orange paracord in our game bags because you can use it to, retie a D-loop, tie down a tent, or for any number of field uses when you're out hunting. And then we put reflective logos and reflective paracord in our bags because, I have found myself many times trying to, go retrieve meat in the middle of the night. And sometimes it's easy to find your game bags and sometimes it's not, but the reflective materials sort of built into our product just make it easy to see at night. And anybody who's ever used our product will know that you can see them from a long ways away as a result. We wanted to make a product that was both reusable, so you didn't have to buy a new set of game bags every year, that were durable and would hold up over time, and were made out of materials that were reusable. Most of the companies that were making game bags prior to us, I would say they were trying to sell a set of game bags for each species. So pronghorn, mule deer, whitetail deer. And it's like, to me, that was always ridiculous as a consumer. Those animals are damn near the same size. Yeah. You should be able to make one set of game bags for all of those. You might make less money as a company, but it's an honest way to make a product instead of trying to sell people something based on the species. So that might have been for some people, a poor business decision, but as a consumer, it felt honest. And so we created, one set of game bags for deer size game, one set for caribou and elk size game. And then we've since added some moose kits, but essentially with 3 sets of game bags that are sized appropriately, you can fit any North American big game animal. So it came down to the material, the fabric, quality construction, and then just the weight and the space that our products take up.
Mm-hmm. And then your knives as well. So those are fantastic pieces too. How did you get into that?
I have used a lot of different knives. I've used fixed blades. I've used replaceable blade knives. I've never really felt like replaceable blades. First of all, I've broken off a lot of replaceable blade knives inside of animals when I'm cutting them up. I've had some, friends, they're crazy sharp. They have a place, but I'm not a fan. Just didn't feel like the right tool for the job for me. The challenge was, as a lightweight hunter and largely as a backpack hunter, I wanted to be able to create a knife that be able to retain an edge through an entire elk. I didn't want to have to carry a knife sharpener with me if I was backpack hunting, if I was carrying a fixed blade knife. So I wanted to create a knife that could achieve that result, and was also the length and the shape of the blade was designed to be sort of the jack of all trades for hunting. I didn't want to, as a user, have to carry multiple fixed blade knives, one for skinning, one for deboning. I wanted one knife that could do everything. And, not that there weren't knives out there that could do that, but they weren't done in the way that I wanted them to be done. And so that was the design idea for our first knife, which is our carbon knife. And so we made that, and then that was, well received. And then we've since have gone on. We have 3 knives that we make, kind of with different blade profiles and shapes, mostly for based on personal preference. All of them, though, use the same S35VN steel, and all of them are designed to do anything you need to do. So they're not. I don't sell a skinning knife or a deboning knife. They're all designed to do everything. You can do everything you need to do with one knife. They just have different features based on sort of people's preferences.
Yeah, that's great. And then you've got the new belt coming out this fall, which is super cool.
Yeah, our Kodiak belt, which is a belt. It's a belt and a knife sharpener in one, essentially. So it has it is a belt designed to be, a belt that you would want to wear hunting and backpacking, no matter, even without the knife sharpening features. And that was sort of what I wanted to create was, instead of, we get asked a lot about like which knife sharpener works with your knife in the field. And there are some really good field sharpeners out there. I don't carry a knife sharpener with me because I just don't want to have to carry that extra weight. So anyways, our Kodiak belt incorporates 3 different sharpening elements into it. There is a tungsten carbide sharpening bar on the top of the belt buckle that's sort of embedded in the buckle. So there's a thin aluminum buckle on the belt itself. That tungsten carbide bar, which actually works really well as a sharpening element, took a lot of testing to get the sort of chemical components of that tungsten carbide just right, so it was effective as a knife sharpener. That is what most people will use sort of 90% of the time. You can use that to touch up any blade in the field. We also put on the back of the buckle, if you need to reshape your blade, there is an embedded 800 grit diamond grit plate that sort of seats flush with the back of your buckle. And so you can use that as a fairly fine grained diamond grit, but you can use that in the field to reshape your blade. And then the final sharpening implement is a chunk of vegetable tan leather sort of sewn into the side of the belt. So the idea is you can shape, sharpen, or hone any knife, broadhead, or anything else you need to. It works super well. And we did a pre-sale this spring, and that product will actually be in the field here starting in early October. But yeah, really very proud of that product because it took a long time to figure out how to make.
I pre-ordered one. I can't wait to try it out.
Oh, all right. Glad.
Yeah. Super. Brad, other than your own company, what other brands do you feel like are doing just a great job with product quality? Because you're obviously very, very conscious of quality and products and doing things the right way and being intellectually honest with all of that.
Yeah, man, there are a lot. So I would say, First Light is a company that I've worked with for years who takes product feedback very seriously. All the companies that I use their gear, I give them feedback, and I also like getting, receiving feedback on quality issues. Vortex is one that, takes quality control very seriously. A brand that I don't work with, but I think makes a really high quality product is Feathered Friends. Their sleeping bags are phenomenal.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yep. I of all the sleeping bags I've used, like those guys, those are some of the best high quality bags I've ever used. Another one that takes quality really seriously, I'd say, is EXO Mountain Gear here in Boise. My friend Steve runs that company, and I'd say Steve and I are comparable in some ways about just being incredibly meticulous around the details of product. So those are just a few off the top of my head I can think of.
Yeah. Yeah. Super. No, that's great. Thank you. Brad, is there a book or books that have had a massive impact on your life?
Oh man, massive impact. I don't know about that. Yeah, for sure.
It's been very influential.
Yeah, for sure. Sound County Almanac, Ala Leopold, that's kind of a classic one. There are, Terry Tempest Williams wrote a book. I'm blanking on the name of it though right now. Oh gosh, I can't remember the name of it, but Terry Tempest Williams has a book about the southern Utah desert country that I've read a number of times. That was really important. I tend to read books and kind of remember the idea of what I read, but not remember like sometimes who wrote it, what the title of the book was. So yeah, I'd say some of the books that I take inspiration from really don't have anything to do with like hunting or business. As an example, I'm reading a book right now called Rebel Yell about Stonewall Jackson, and it's Civil War era history. I probably won't remember the name of that book, 10 years from now, but I'll tell you one thing I remember is just Stonewall Jackson's management personality and his way of approaching risk. I'll always remember that because I find it very fascinating and a lot of parallels with business. So,
yeah, that makes sense. And I find that that's the same for me if I'm reading on a Kindle as opposed to a physical book, because then you kind of lose that visual element of seeing the title, the author,
right.
The cover, and you're associating it. So if you're reading on a Kindle, that's probably the same, maybe.
Yeah.
Brad, do you have a favorite podcast?
Oh man, that's another great question. I listen to a lot more podcasts in the pre-COVID era because I was, always traveling. So I had a lot of time to listen to podcasts. I think if I had to pick one, I would say Hidden Brain is my favorite.
Not familiar.
I'm not familiar with that one.
Had to check that out.
Hidden Brain is social science podcast. It's on NPR. It's really about, I find it to be a fascinating podcast about human nature, and in a lot of different, it covers a wide variety of topics, but there are a lot of parallels in that podcast, interesting topics that can be applied to sort of, personal and business life. And I have, I listen to Meat Eater podcasts as well, like Steve's podcast, but I'd say Hidden Brain is probably my favorite just because it's interesting.
Yeah. Great. Brad, what's one final piece of closing advice that you would give to our audience?
Figure out something that interests you and in your life, and find something interesting and figure out how to make that your job.
Yeah, that's good advice. Thank you. And where can people find you online if they want to learn what you're doing, follow you on social, check out Argali, conservation?
Yeah, you can, Argali Official is our Instagram handle. And then our website, argalioutdoors.com, is probably the best way to find us on the internet.
Super. Brad, thanks so much for your time today. I'm going to let you get to your kids, and thanks everyone for listening.
All right. Yes. Thanks, Seth. I appreciate your patience.
Of course.
Thanks for listening to the Rewild Gear Podcast. You could check out the show notes for today's episode at rewildgearpodcast.com. If you're ready to spend more time in the wild, our line of high-quality, minimalistic outdoor gear can help you do just that. Check us out at rewildgear.com.